The ground felt too still beneath my feet, like the world had stopped spinning just for this, just long enough to let me bury my daughter. A breeze should have passed. A bird should have chirped. But the silence around Isla's grave was so loud it made my bones ache. I stood there in a dark suit that didn't fit quite right, too loose from the weight I'd lost since her last breath, and stared at a casket that looked like it belonged in a dollhouse, not in the soil. White. Clean. Wrong. Her name was engraved in delicate script, Isla Marie Thompson, born and gone in the same year. 5 months old. My daughter. My everything. Gone. No wife beside me. No hand to hold. Just emptiness stretching across rows of headstones like a bad dream. I'd called Sabrina the night before, my voice shaking so hard I thought the phone would fall from my hands. Please, I had whispered, please come. I can't do this alone. I wasn't begging for much, not a parade, not a miracle. Just her presence. But the voice that answered wasn't hers. It was Carla, her mother. It's just a baby, Malik, she'd said. Ryan's engagement party is tonight. Sabrina already committed to that. Like it was a charity gala she couldn't reschedule. Like our daughter's death was an inconvenience. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My brain short-circuited trying to process the math. How grief could weigh less in their eyes than poolside photos and champagne toasts. And Sabrina? She didn't call back. She didn't text. I saw on Instagram that she was already tanning with her cousins, all wearing matching white. White, the same color as Isla's casket. The irony dug into my skin like glass. I arrived at the cemetery that morning with a folded program in one hand and a trembling bouquet of baby's breath in the other. A pastor I barely knew stood a few paces away, flipping through his notes like it was just another stop on his daily route. Should we wait for anyone else? He'd asked gently. I shook my head. No. There was no one else. I was the only one who showed up for my daughter. No in-laws. No friends from her side. No uncles or cousins calling to say, we're on our way. I'd written a few words the night before. Nothing fancy. Just things I never got to say while Isla was still breathing. You were joy in the shape of a girl, I said aloud, my voice cracking under the weight. You changed the rhythm of my days, little one. And I would have given everything to trade places with you. I placed the flowers on the casket, knelt beside the grave, and sobbed into my palms while the pastor read from Psalm 34. I wasn't religious, but I needed something, anything, to stitch the moment together. Dirt hit the casket with a sound I'll never forget. Hollow. Final. The earth didn't care who it swallowed. When it was over, I stood motionless as the workers gently smoothed the dirt like nothing ever happened there. They didn't ask questions. They just did their job. And I did mine. I suffered in silence. When I got home, the baby monitor light was still blinking in her room. I didn't have the heart to unplug it. Her crib stood untouched. Stuffed animals neatly arranged. A onesie that said, Daddy's Girl, still folded on the changing table. I sat in her rocking chair, held the last bottle I'd fed her with, and let time do what it does, move forward without consent. At 7:13 p.m., Sabrina posted a photo of herself in a yellow bikini, toasting with a mimosa next to her brother Ryan. The caption read, celebrating love and life. And I realized, in that moment, that we weren't grieving the same person. Or maybe we weren't grieving at all, just me. The woman I'd married 4 years ago had evaporated into someone I couldn't recognize. I'd thought I was building a life with someone who saw me, who understood me. But Sabrina's grief had an off switch. Mine didn't. Mine rang through my ribcage like an alarm I couldn't mute. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table until the ice melted. I stared at the fridge where Isla's ultrasound picture was still magnet in the top corner. Her first photo, her first smile, her first laugh, all packed into 5 fleeting months. I thought about how Carla's voice had sounded on the phone, bored, dismissive, cruel in the most casual way. It's just a baby, she'd said. Like Isla didn't have fingers that curled around mine, or a laugh that hiccuped mid-giggle. Like she didn't exist outside of a hospital record and a death certificate. That phrase looped in my mind until rage took its place. Because Isla had mattered. She'd mattered more than any engagement party or social media update. She'd mattered more than Sabrina's followers or Ryan's proposal video. And if they couldn't see that, then I had to make them see it. I stood up from the table, walked into the study, and opened my laptop. I created a folder called Isla. Inside it, I started collecting everything: photos, texts, timestamps. I backed up every voicemail. I saved screenshots of Sabrina's Instagram posts from the day of the funeral. I printed Carla's message. Slowly, methodically, I started planning something. Not out of malice, but out of justice. There was a difference. They thought I would grieve quietly, like a footnote to their bigger, shinier lives. They thought I would fade, like Isla's name on a headstone that no one visits. But I don't vanish. I build. I wait. And one day soon, they'd understand just how loud silence can be. It's strange how a truth can hide in plain sight for years, whispering in the background while you convince yourself it's just noise. But once you really hear it, once it sharpens into something undeniable, you can't unhear it. Sabrina and I had been married for 4 years, and for most of that time, I told myself love would be enough. That if I worked hard enough, stayed kind, stayed faithful, stayed present, I could carve out a space in her world where I truly belonged. But the truth was, I was never really in it. Not the way Ryan was. Ryan, her brother, the golden boy, the family's son around which everything else revolved. Carla and Donald didn't hide it. They wore their favoritism like a tailored suit. Every holiday, every dinner, every conversation, it was Ryan's newest job, Ryan's new apartment, Ryan's girlfriend, until she became his fiancée, and even then, somehow, it was still about Ryan. The first time I met Carla, she smiled at me like she'd been handed the wrong meal at a restaurant. Polite, but disappointed. Donald shook my hand and asked me what I did. When I said I was a schoolteacher, he paused and nodded slowly, the way people do when they're trying to hide contempt behind approval. Teaching, he said. That's noble. He said it like charity work. Sabrina didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. She slipped easily back into their rhythm, laughing at inside jokes, deferring to her mother's preferences, parading Ryan's latest success like a badge of honor. I used to think that made her loyal. Now I think it just made her obedient. The first time I realized Sabrina's love had conditions was the night I told her I wanted to start saving for a home. Not a condo. Not a trendy downtown box with rooftop access and cold gray floors. A real home. With a backyard and a porch and a guest room that could one day become a nursery. She hesitated. But Ryan says it's not smart to invest in property before you're 35, she said, stirring her tea absently. Besides, downtown looks better for our brand. Our brand. As if we were a campaign. A curated page instead of a marriage. She worked in marketing, so I dismissed the phrase, chalking it up to habit. But I remembered it. Because something about being part of a brand meant I had to stay polished, presentable, and small enough to fit within her family's frame. And I didn't. I came from a world where dinners were loud, where love was messy and obvious, where success wasn't measured by who posted first, but by how much you showed up. I came from a father who drove a city bus for 30 years and a mother who taught me that dignity wasn't something you put on, it was something you carried. And none of that mattered to them. Sabrina never said it directly, but the message was always there, hanging between her sighs and silences. I wasn't Ryan. I didn't wear custom suits or sit on panels or shake hands with people whose names belonged on building plaques. I didn't sparkle in the same way. I was useful, though. I fixed the leak in the kitchen sink. I balanced the bills. I remembered her parents' anniversary when she forgot. I played the part of a husband well enough to be included in holiday photos, just barely. But there was a limit to their acceptance. I saw it every time Carla gave me that tight-lipped smile. I heard it every time Donald started a sentence with, not to compare, but Ryan. The worst part was that I wanted to be wanted by them. I'd catch myself craving their approval like oxygen, hoping one day I'd earn their respect. But respect isn't something you earn in homes like theirs. It's something you're either born into or shut out of. I used to think Sabrina was different. In the beginning, she felt like warm light in a cold room. She asked about my students. She helped organize a literacy fundraiser. She kissed my forehead when I stayed up late grading papers. But somewhere along the way, that warmth cooled. I don't know when exactly, maybe around the time Ryan bought his second condo and Donald offered to co-sign, but the shift happened. Suddenly, my work wasn't impressive, just sweet. My ideas weren't thoughtful, just quaint. And her love? It started feeling like something I had to perform for, not just receive. I remember one night, lying in bed beside her while she scrolled through her phone. I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold back either. Just let it rest there. Disengaged. I looked at her face, bathed in the glow of her screen, and for the first time, I felt like a guest in my own marriage. A convenient placeholder until something shinier came along. And maybe that's all I ever was to her, a stepping stone into adulthood, a respectable choice that wouldn't make waves but wouldn't stand out either. I wasn't scandalous. I was safe, marketable, a good photo for the holiday card. But the moment Isla came into the picture, everything I'd ignored snapped into focus. I thought our baby would change things. I thought her arrival would fuse us into something real. But all she did was reveal how fake it had been all along. And looking back now, I see how they treated Isla's life the same way they treated mine, as an afterthought. An inconvenience. Just background noise to Ryan's spotlight. The day Sabrina told me she was pregnant, I cried. She didn't. She picked up her phone and texted her mother. When I asked how she felt, she said, excited, I think. And I told myself that was enough. That people process differently. That love doesn't have to look like mine to be real. But the months that followed proved otherwise. Carla responded to the pregnancy news with a shrug, asked if Ryan would be home for the holidays. Donald never brought it up again. And Sabrina? She spent more time picking throw pillows for the nursery than talking to my belly. It's not that she hated the baby, it's that she couldn't see her. Not the way I did. To her, Isla was an accessory. A milestone to photograph, not a soul to know. I stayed quiet through it all. I smiled through the baby shower where they arrived late, dropped off a gift, and left before cake. I smiled through Sabrina's indifference, through Carla's shallow concern, through every conversation that revolved around Ryan's wedding venue, and never once circled back to the growing life inside my wife. But the silence had started to simmer. And the more they ignored Isla, the more I saw the truth I'd been blind to all along. I was not chosen. I was tolerated. A convenient husband. An expendable father. But Isla? She was never going to be expendable to me. And one day, they would learn what it meant to overlook the wrong man's daughter. I remember the moment the test turned positive. It was early morning, too early for anything but raw truth. The bathroom light was harsh, fluorescent, and flickering, and the silence between us felt more fragile than I wanted to admit. Sabrina stared down at the stick like it had just insulted her. I, on the other hand, felt something deep and ancient move in my chest. Joy, terror, reverence. All of it hit me at once, and I sat down on the edge of the tub, my hands trembling, eyes burning with unshed tears. We're going to be parents, I whispered, and when she didn't respond, I said it again, louder. We're having a baby. Still nothing. She picked up her phone and typed with a kind of detachment that made my stomach twist. Telling Mom, she said. And just like that, the moment was gone. I don't know what I expected. A kiss? A laugh. Even tears would have meant she felt something. Instead, I watched her send that message and wait for a response like we just confirmed a dinner reservation. Carla replied 5 minutes later with a text that read, "Oh, wow. Is Ryan coming home for the holidays?" That punctuation, those 3 dots, held more warmth than her words. And Ryan? He wasn't the one pregnant. He wasn't the one carrying a child or standing in a bathroom with hope crawling up his spine. But as far as her family was concerned, he was always the one worth celebrating. That text was the tone of our entire pregnancy. Cold, distracted, dismissive. Sabrina never really glowed. Not in that soft, expectant way people talk about. She moved through each trimester like it was a checklist to complete rather than a journey to feel. Her browser history was filled with Pinterest boards of nurseries, stroller reviews, and maternity shoot ideas, but nothing about baby development, bonding, or birth plans. She shopped, posed, and scrolled. I read parenting books, practiced diapering on a teddy bear, whispered lullabies to her belly late at night when I thought she was asleep. I didn't want to admit how lonely it felt, loving someone so small while the woman carrying her seemed to be somewhere else entirely. When we told Carla and Donald in person, they smiled, gave Sabrina an air kiss and me a limp handshake, and immediately pivoted the conversation to Ryan's promotion. He's heading up the new regional division, Donald said with pride, passing around a photo of Ryan at a desk with floor-to-ceiling windows. Sabrina nodded, chimed in, he's killing it. No one asked how she was feeling. No one asked about the baby. It was as if our news had been a commercial break between episodes of The Ryan Show. I laughed a little that night, bitter and hollow, thinking about how our child would enter a world already playing second fiddle. But I still hoped. I thought maybe once Isla was born, once she had a name, a face, a heartbeat they could hear with their own ears, it would change. Love would awaken. That's what I told myself, Anyway, Sabrina's baby shower was hosted at Carla's house, a sprawling space with marble counters and furniture you weren't supposed to sit on. It wasn't about celebration, it was about optics. Carla invited her friends, not ours. The whole thing looked like a showroom for a lifestyle magazine. Sabrina wore a pale pink dress and posed for photos like a brand ambassador. Carla coordinated every detail down to the label on the water bottles. When they arrived, Donald handed off a gift bag without making eye contact, muttered congratulations, and checked his watch. They were gone before the cake was cut. Sabrina didn't seem surprised. I stayed after to clean up while she scrolled through the party hashtag. It looks perfect, she said. And in photos, maybe it did. But beneath the curated angles and smiling filters, I saw it clearly. No one here was excited to meet our daughter. Not really. Not in the way I was. The night Isla was born, the hospital room was quiet. It was just the two of us. No flowers, no visits, no family rushing in with balloons or cameras. Sabrina's labor had been long, but her face stayed detached through most of it, like she was enduring something rather than bringing someone into the world. When Isla arrived, tiny and loud and perfect, something inside me broke open. She had jet black curls and my eyes. Her fingers wrapped around mine like they'd known me forever. I cried. Sabrina didn't. She looked tired, said, "She's cute," then turned over and went asleep. I held Isla all night, watching her chest rise and fall, memorizing the weight of her, the smell of her skin, the miracle of her breath. I texted Carla a photo. She didn't respond. The next day, she posted a picture of Ryan standing on the balcony of his new condo, captioned, "So proud of my boy." Sabrina shared the post. No mention of Isla. No welcome to the world. No acknowledgement that something sacred had happened. I should have said something then. I should have shouted or wept or demanded they see what they were missing. But I stayed quiet. I rocked Isla in my arms and told her what they wouldn't, that she was enough, that she was seen, that she was loved. Every late-night feeding, every diaper change, every sleepy smile, I was there. Sabrina floated in and out, more interested in getting her body back and returning to work than sinking into the newness of motherhood. I wasn't angry. I was numb, resigned. I'd started to accept that Isla and I existed in a world parallel to hers, running beside but never intersecting. And even then, even with all the signs, I never imagined they'd abandon her in the end. I never thought they'd choose a party over her funeral. But looking back now, I realized they'd been choosing Ryan over her since the beginning. Since before her heartbeat was even heard. Since the first ultrasound. Since that stupid text. "Oh wow, is Ryan coming home for the holidays?" That question echoed in my mind, louder than any apology they'd never give. And with every beat of my heart, I knew I had one job left, to make sure Isla was never forgotten. Not by me, and not by the world. There are mornings you never forget, and then there are mornings you spend the rest of your life trying to unremember. That morning, the one when Isla didn't wake, was both. It was 6:17 a.m. when the sunlight crept across her room, gentle and gold like it always was through those east-facing windows. Her baby monitor blinked silently beside me, and for a second, I thought maybe she was just still asleep. I rubbed my eyes, swung my legs out of bed, and let my bare feet find the cold wood floor. I didn't know my life had already split in half. The night before had been normal, or at least our version of it. Isla had been sniffly but not alarming. Babies get colds. The doctor said to keep her hydrated, watch for fever, but otherwise just let it pass. I'd stayed up with her while Sabrina worked late. Sabrina always worked late. Deadlines, she'd said that night, not even looking up from her laptop. I didn't argue. I was used to it by then. Isla and I had our own rhythm. I'd swaddled her in the soft purple blanket my mother crocheted before she passed, cradled her in the nursery chair, hummed some off-key lullaby that made her smile even with a stuffy nose. Her giggles, those soft, squeaky little hiccuped sounds, were the only thing in the world that could undo me. When she started dozing, I'd kissed her forehead and whispered, "See you in the morning, baby girl." I never thought that would be the last thing I'd say to her. I opened her door that morning expecting to hear her breathing. I always listened before I looked, some quiet part of me always making sure. But there was only silence. Still, I didn't panic. Maybe she was just sleeping in. Maybe the cold made her a little more tired. But when I reached the crib, when I saw her face, still, too still, I knew. Something primal in me knew. Her skin was pale, Her lips slightly parted but unmoving, and her tiny chest was still. My brain refused to accept it, but my body reacted anyway. I scooped her up and her arms dangled lifeless. Isla, I whispered. Baby, wake up. I shook her gently, then harder. Come on. Please, Isla, please. The panic came like a flood. I placed her on the floor, my hands fumbling as I tried to remember how CPR worked on infants. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Don't press too hard. Check for breathing. Again. Again. Her head wobbled as I pressed, and I sobbed through clenched teeth, trying to breathe for both of us. Nothing. I screamed. I screamed so loud I thought my lungs would tear. I shouted Sabrina's name. She didn't answer. She wasn't home. She hadn't come to bed last night. Just going to stay at Mom's, she'd texted late. Too tired to drive. I'd rolled my eyes at the time. Now I wanted to rip the phone off the wall. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. The dispatcher's voice was calm, too calm, asking me to describe what I saw, whether she was breathing, whether her lips were blue. She's gone, I said, my voice breaking. She's cold. Paramedics arrived in under 10 minutes. I didn't stop CPR even as they entered, my hands moving automatically, as if effort could outrun fate. They pulled me back gently, checked her vitals, hooked her to wires I didn't understand. But the shaking of their heads said everything. I'm sorry, one of them whispered. I fell to the floor. I couldn't feel my legs. My arms felt like rubber. My face was soaked, and I couldn't remember how to speak. They called it SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Sometimes babies just stop. No warning. No cause. Just stillness. The cruelty of it shattered me. To bring a child into the world and have her taken without reason, without a fight, it was more than I could comprehend. Sabrina arrived an hour later. She walked in wearing leggings and a loose sweater, holding her phone, scrolling. Hey, she said casually. Did you call? I saw a bunch of mist, her voice caught when she saw my face. The paramedics. The open crib. What happened? She asked, her tone suddenly tight. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. No, she whispered, eyes wide. No, no, no. I expected a collapse. I expected the kind of grief that knocks the air out of your lungs. But she didn't fall to her knees. She didn't scream. She sat on the couch and stared. She cried once. One single tear. Then she wiped her face, looked around the room, and said, What now? That question sliced through me. Not is she really gone? Not how did this happen? Not what do we do? Just, what now? As if we'd missed a flight or lost a job. Like this was an inconvenience, not the erasure of our child. I walked out of the room. I had to, because if I stayed, I was going to scream at her. I was going to break something. I sat in the driveway in the cold, watching the sun rise over the neighbor's roof, listening to the buzz of morning traffic, wondering how the world could keep spinning when mine had just shattered. Hours passed like fog. The coroner came. I signed forms. Sabrina made coffee. That evening, she posted nothing. Not a single word about Isla. No black square. No memory. No photo. I did. I posted the last picture I took of Isla smiling, captioned with one sentence. She made 5 months feel like a lifetime of joy. Only a handful of Sabrina's friends commented. Carla never called. Donald didn't text. Ryan didn't even acknowledge it. My family cried with me. My sister flew in that night. My cousin brought food I couldn't eat. My uncle prayed in the corner of the living room. But Sabrina's world? Silence. She slept in the guest room that night. I didn't ask why. I lay in Isla's nursery, curled up on the rug beside the crib like if I stayed close enough, she might come back. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what kind of mother doesn't feel the loss of her child, and what kind of husband I'd been to miss all the signs. But more than anything, I knew this. I had lost my daughter. And in that same breath, I realized I had never really had my wife. I'd planned a funeral while Sabrina packed for a pool party. That sentence alone should have been enough to break me, but grief has a way of hollowing you out so completely that shock becomes just another texture in the air. It had been 4 days since Isla passed, and in those days I hadn't slept more than a few hours, hadn't eaten more than a slice of toast, hadn't spoken more than necessary. My days blurred into paperwork and phone calls, decisions that felt like betrayals. Choosing a casket, picking flowers, selecting a plot in a cemetery I'd never wanted to visit. I didn't even know how much a baby-sized coffin cost until I was asked if I wanted silk lining. I nodded blankly. Yes. Whatever makes it kind. That was the word I kept coming back to. Kind. I wanted her send-off to be the kind of thing I'd wish someone would do for me if I died small and forgotten. I wanted softness, dignity, meaning. But the people who should have shared that weight with me treated it like a calendar conflict. Sabrina hadn't helped with a single detail. When I first asked her if she'd call the church, she said she needed space to process. Then she texted Carla, and 20 minutes later, Carla called me instead. Malik, we've decided not to come, she said. Calm, clipped, like she was explaining a change in restaurant reservations. Ryan's engagement party is this weekend. Family is flying in. We can't miss it. I didn't speak. My voice had disintegrated by then, worn out from shouting inside myself. Carla filled the silence like she always did, with insult disguised as reason. It's just a baby, she said, her voice softening in mock empathy. People lose babies all the time. We need to focus on celebrating life. You understand, don't you? I didn't. I didn't understand anything anymore. I looked down at the funeral program in my lap, the one with Isla's picture on the cover. Her smile. Her tiny teeth just coming in. No, I said quietly. I don't understand at all. 2 hours later, I walked past the master bedroom and found Sabrina folding a swimsuit into her overnight bag. I watched her from the doorway for a full minute before she noticed me. What? She asked, annoyed. Are you going somewhere? I managed to ask, though I already knew. To Mom's. The party starts tomorrow. I figured I'd go early. I need to get away from all this. All this. The funeral of our daughter. The raw ache of her absence. The death that now filled every room in our house. I didn't argue. There was no use. We weren't speaking the same language anymore. Maybe we never had. So I walked away and let her leave. I picked up my suit from the dry cleaner. I collected the death certificate. I selected the music for the service. I stood in the nursery that night and rehearsed the eulogy in my head. My voice cracked on every syllable, but I kept going. Because someone had to carry her memory forward. And apparently that someone was only me. The day of the funeral, the weather was cruelly beautiful. Not a cloud in the sky. Not a whisper of wind. The kind of day people hope for weddings, not farewells. I arrived 30 minutes early. The chairs were already set up, 20 of them, just in case, but they stayed empty. The funeral home director kept glancing at his watch, then at the parking lot. Will anyone else be joining us? He asked gently. I shook my head. Just me. The pastor nodded solemnly. We'll begin in a few minutes. I stood by Isla's casket, a box too white, too small, too final, and ran my fingertips along the edge. I placed her favorite stuffed bunny beside her, the one I used to make dance across her belly when she cried. I slipped a note into the folds of the blanket she was wrapped in. It said, simply, you were loved every single day. I gave the eulogy with a voice that barely held. She never learned to speak, I said, but she taught me more than anyone ever has. She reminded me what it means to be present, to cherish, to hope. I will carry her with me in everything I do. The tears came hard after that. I couldn't stop them, and I didn't try. I wept like a man with no audience, no wife, no family to pretend for. I let it all pour out. Months of frustration, fear, love, loss, until the tears ran dry and I was just a man kneeling beside the grave of his child, alone in a world too busy to care. At the reception that wasn't a reception, just a table with 2 pitchers of lemonade and a guest book I'd signed myself, I got a notification on my phone. Instagram. Sabrina had posted a photo, her and Ryan clinking glasses poolside. She wore sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and that same swimsuit she packed the day before. Her caption read, "Family is everything." My thumb hovered over the screen. My eyes blurred, and then I laughed. A sound so bitter it felt like it belonged to someone else. That was the moment I stopped hoping for change. That was when I stopped trying to explain Isla's worth to people who never saw her as more than a footnote in their lives. I didn't rage. I didn't respond. But inside me, something shifted, like a door clicking shut. They thought I would cry, grieve, and vanish. That I would fold quietly into the shadows of my own pain. But I don't vanish. I wait. I listen. I build. And as I stood there beside Isla's grave, while Sabrina toasted 3 miles away, I made a vow, not just to Isla, but to myself. They would remember this moment. Not because I begged, not because I yelled, but because grief, when wielded with precision, becomes power. And power, in silence, is far more terrifying than any scream. 3 days after Isla's funeral, Sabrina walked through the front door like she was returning from a weekend retreat. Not from the party that stole her from our daughter's burial. Not from the shallow, curated life she had chosen over grief. She walked in with a canvas tote bag on one arm, sunglasses on her head, and not a drop of apology in her voice. "The house smells like candles and Lysol," she said, half laughing as she kicked off her sandals. "You've been cleaning?" I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice. I was sitting in the corner of the living room with a stack of photo albums on my lap, half opened, half forgotten, my fingers lingering on a picture of Isla wrapped in her first blanket. "You've barely spoken," she said. "I know it's hard. Maybe we need a vacation. Somewhere warm. Just us." Her voice didn't match the weight of the room. She didn't acknowledge the urn on the mantel. Didn't glance at the framed photo of Isla I'd moved to the center of the coffee table. Didn't sit close to me. She perched on the edge of the couch like a visitor. And that's what she'd become, someone just passing through a home still pulsing with the ache of absence. I nodded slowly, placed the photo album on the floor, and stood. "I'll think about it," I said. She smiled like she'd won a round. And maybe she thought she had. Maybe she thought the silence was forgiveness. But it wasn't. It was calculation. Because while she sipped wine by the pool, I'd been collecting. I didn't know I was building a case until it had already started taking shape. The text from Carla. The Instagram photo timestamps. Screenshots of party decorations shared by Sabrina's cousin, dated the exact time Isla's casket was lowered into the ground. Every pixel of their joy placed beside my grief. Every cocktail posed beside my broken vows. I created folders. One for photos. One for messages. One labeled statements, where I wrote down every phrase they said that made my spine go rigid. "It's just a baby. Don't make a scene. You understand, don't you?" I cataloged the absence like evidence. Because what they didn't understand, what they never saw coming, was that grief, when left alone too long, transforms. It stops begging for comfort. It starts reaching for justice. And mine had begun sharpening itself behind a locked study door. I reached out to a lawyer I'd met years ago through a friend. His name was Charles. Older man, firm voice, no tolerance for mess. "I need help," I told him, but quietly. He listened. I explained what happened, not just the funeral, but the history, the way Sabrina's family treated Isla like a footnote from the moment her heartbeat was heard. The emotional negligence. The betrayal. I told him I wasn't interested in drama. I wanted clarity, documentation, the legal leverage to make choices that would protect my daughter's memory and my own sanity. Charles didn't ask why I wasn't yelling. He didn't ask why I wasn't crying. He understood. "I've seen this before," he said. "You're not looking to fight. You're looking to end it properly." I nodded. He drew up preliminary documents. Divorce preparation. Asset tracing. He asked if I had a will. I did. He asked if Sabrina had access to my accounts. She did. He asked if I wanted to change that. I already had. Quietly. Efficiently. I rerouted my direct deposits. Transferred half my savings into a separate account she didn't know existed. One I'd opened under my mother's maiden name. I moved my digital footprint like someone who knew he'd be erased if he didn't. Meanwhile, I wrote letters. To Isla. Every night before bed. I told her about the day. What I missed. What I remembered. What I would never let them forget. I wasn't sleeping much, but I didn't need to. Vengeance doesn't sleep. It waits. Sabrina kept moving like nothing had changed. She went back to work. Took meetings on the patio. Laughed loudly on calls while I paced the upstairs hallway, listening to her live in a world where our daughter's death was just a footnote. Once, I passed by the guest room and found her watching a video of Ryan's engagement party on her phone. There was music, dancing, confetti cannons, laughter. I stood there, unseen, listening to my wife rewind a moment of joy she chose over grief. I didn't make a sound. I went back to the study, added the clip to the folder, labeled it priority. 2 weeks later, I was ready. The plan wasn't to explode. It wasn't to burn everything down. It was to expose. Quietly, strategically, precisely. I accepted an invitation to dinner at Carla and Donald's house. Sabrina said they wanted to reconnect. "It's time to heal," she said. "We've all been through a lot." I smiled and agreed. Healing, I thought. Yes, but not the way she meant. On the night of the dinner, I wore a navy blue button-down and my father's old watch. I brought a bottle of wine in a manila envelope. I greeted Carla with a nod and Donald with a handshake that lasted 1 second longer than comfort allowed. I sat at the table like a guest of honor at a show they didn't know was theirs. They made small talk about Ryan's upcoming wedding. Carla gushed about the guest list. Donald asked if I was teaching summer classes. Sabrina rubbed her temples like she was already exhausted. I waited. Through appetizers. Through wine. Through Donald's fourth mention of Ryan's new lake house. And then, after dessert, I reached into my coat and placed the envelope on the table. Before we toast Ryan's future, I said, I'd like to share something from the past. Carla's smile faltered. What's this? Perspective. She opened the envelope. Inside were photos, side-by-side images. Isla's casket. Carla in a bikini holding a mimosa. Sabrina smiling poolside while I stood over a grave. Carla flipped through the pages like they were hot to the touch. Donald went silent. Sabrina's face paled. What is this? She stammered. You posted these, I said. You all did. While I stood alone. The room went still. Their forks paused midair. Their mouths opened, but no words came. This isn't a confrontation, I said. It's documentation. So when I act next, no one can say they didn't know why. Carla swallowed hard. Malik, that's not fair. I looked at her for the first time in weeks. Neither was burying Isla alone. And with that, I stood. I didn't wait for their apologies. I didn't need their confusion. I had already packed the truth neatly, chronologically, and mercilessly. What came next wouldn't be loud. It would be permanent. I knew what I was doing the moment I accepted the dinner invitation. Sabrina had tried to dress it up, said her parents wanted to clear the air, maybe find some common ground again. That's what they always did. Painted over wrought with pastel phrases. But I wasn't showing up for reconciliation. I wasn't interested in healing or harmony or any of the soft illusions they tried to sell. I was walking into that house like a surgeon, steady hands, a scalpel of truth in my pocket, and no intention of leaving things the way I found them. The moment I stepped through the front door of Carla and Donald's home, the scent of lavender candles and overpriced furniture polish washed over me like it always had. Nothing had changed. Not the family portrait in the entryway with Ryan front and center, not the curated vases with decorative sticks no one ever touched. It was all sterile, all staged. The only thing different was me. Carla greeted me with that same smile, tight-lipped, hollow, performative. Malik, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek like she hadn't spat on my daughter's memory just weeks before. Donald clapped my shoulder like we were old friends, like he hadn't stood by while Sabrina skipped her child's funeral to sip champagne in a poolside cabana. Sabrina floated in behind me, her eyes scanning the room like she wasn't sure what version of herself to be tonight. Dinner was roast chicken, perfectly plated. There was wine, always wine, and praise for Ryan's engagement ring that looked more like a down payment on a mortgage than a token of love. Carla held court as usual, telling stories about wedding planners and floral arrangements while Donald chimed in with commentary on venue options. Sabrina nodded along, sipping her wine, smiling on cue. I waited. They didn't ask about Isla. They didn't ask how I was doing. I wasn't surprised. For them, grief was an inconvenience, something that belonged behind closed doors and never in polite conversation. But I wasn't there for their comfort. I was there for clarity. When dessert arrived, a lemon tart Sabrina had once called healing food, I placed my fork down, reached into my coat pocket, and slid the envelope across the table to Carla. Her fingers hesitated before touching it. What's this? She asked, already uneasy. Before you toast to Ryan's future, I said, I'd like to show you what you missed in the past. Silence fell like a curtain. Carla opened the envelope, and her expression twisted the moment her eyes landed on the contents. One by one, she pulled out the photos, Isla's grave, the baby-sized casket surrounded by nothing but air and trees. Then, beside it, a picture of her and Sabrina poolside, cocktails in hand, grinning under the sun. A side-by-side of grief and celebration, mourning and mockery. Donald leaned over her shoulder, his brows furrowing as he tried to process what he was seeing. Sabrina stiffened beside me. What is this? She asked, her voice small but rising. It's the truth, I said. A visual timeline of what really mattered to this family. Carla closed the envelope quickly, like the paper burned her fingers. This is completely inappropriate. Inappropriate? I echoed, my voice low, steady. You mean unlike skipping your granddaughter's funeral to drink rose and post bikini selfies? Donald cleared his throat. Malik, now's not the time, I know, Donald. I cut in. Now is exactly the time. Because you've all spent the last few weeks pretending Isla was a footnote. A detour. But she wasn't. She was my daughter. She was your family. And none of you showed up. Sabrina looked around the table, her lips parted, eyes darting like she was trying to find a script she'd lost. You never said you were going to do this, she whispered. Of course not, I replied. You would have tried to stop me. Or spin it. Or post another filtered selfie to drown it out. You're trying to embarrass us, Carla said. This isn't how family handles things. No, I said. Family doesn't abandon its own in the darkest moment of their life. Family doesn't lie to save face. And family doesn't treat a child's death as a scheduling conflict. Donald's face flushed red. This isn't productive, Malik. You've made your point. No, I said again, rising from my chair. I haven't. This moment right here, is just the beginning. I'm not yelling. I'm not throwing things. But understand this clearly. I'm done protecting your reputation. I'm done pretending your silence was anything less than cruelty. Sabrina stood, too. You can't just weaponize grief. I don't have to, I said, turning toward her. You did that the moment you chose to party instead of bury your daughter. The moment you packed a swimsuit instead of helping me pick a casket. You chose your comfort over Isla's memory. All I'm doing is refusing to let you forget it. Carla opened her mouth, but no words came. Donald looked away. Sabrina's eyes began to water, but even her tears felt like performance. Like she realized the camera had finally turned back on her, and she didn't know which angle to pose from. I placed my napkin gently on the table and looked at them all, this perfect, porcelain family that had cracked wide open without ever hearing the sound. You thought silence was safer. That if no one said anything, the truth would stay buried with her. But she deserved more than your shame. And now? Now the world will know exactly what she was worth to you. I turned and walked toward the door. Sabrina followed me into the hallway, her voice cracking. Malik, please, don't go. Not like this. I stopped, looked back at her one final time. You didn't come to her funeral, Sabrina, so you don't get to ask how I leave now. And with that, I walked out, not just of the house, but of the illusion we'd been clinging to for years. The masks were off, the stage was bare, and the performance was finally over. I didn't post it in anger. That part matters. I didn't hit upload with shaking hands or tear-streaked cheeks. There was no dramatic music swelling in the background, no adrenaline surge. Just the quiet of a Monday morning, coffee gone cold beside my laptop, and the simple need to tell the truth. For weeks, I had carried my grief like a secret I was ashamed of, something too raw, too inconvenient for the polished people Sabrina surrounded herself with. But grief isn't shameful. What they did, that was shameful. So I gathered everything. Photos, messages, moments they wanted forgotten, and I told Isla's story, start to finish. I began the video with a black screen and soft piano music, then faded in a single image, Isla, wrapped in her lavender blanket, eyes wide, mouth open in a gummy smile. My voice came in after a few seconds, steady and clear. This is my daughter, Isla Marie Thompson. She was 5 months old. She loved ceiling fans and the sound of rain. She made me laugh every day. She died of SIDS on a quiet Thursday morning while I was watching her sleep. 3 days later, I buried her, alone. The video didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It simply unfolded. I showed a photo of Isla's grave, bare and quiet, and then, without commentary, cut to screenshots from Sabrina's Instagram, Carla's poolside pose, the group photo from Ryan's party, each one time-stamped. The contrast spoke louder than any accusation. When I called to ask for support, I said in the narration, I was told it was just a baby, that there were more important things happening. And they were right. In their world, Ryan's engagement party took priority over my daughter's funeral. I didn't mention Sabrina by name. I didn't have to. Everyone who knew us, extended family, old college friends, distant cousins, knew who was in the photos. They recognized the house, the voices, the vacations. They knew the cast. I ended the video with a slow fade to a single rose lying beside Isla's gravestone. No hashtags. No please. Just the caption. She was just a baby, but she mattered to someone. I set the privacy to friends and family. Then I closed the laptop and went for a walk. I didn't wait around to read the responses. I didn't need to. I'd planted the seed, and I knew exactly what it would grow into. By the time I got back, my phone had blown up. Missed calls. Voicemails. Messages. Some were from people I hadn't heard from in years, former coworkers, cousins who lived in other states, friends from college who'd followed our journey from wedding to parenthood. Their messages were laced with disbelief and heartbreak. "I'm so sorry, Malik. I had no idea. Isla deserved better." But it wasn't just sympathy, it was outrage. Quiet, simmering fury on my behalf. Within hours, the video had been shared privately among friends of friends. People started asking questions. Carla and Donald's carefully controlled image began to fray. A cousin on Sabrina's side reached out to ask why she'd lied about being sick during the funeral. Another relative posted a vague but pointed status on Facebook. "It costs $0 to show up for your family. But the debt of absence lasts forever." Sponsors for Ryan's engagement gala, yes, they'd somehow managed to brand it with partnerships, began to quietly withdraw. One event coordinator pulled out entirely, citing unforeseen conflicts. Another boutique florist Sabrina had featured on her page asked to have the post removed. "We'd prefer not to be associated with family drama," they said in a message I also saved. Their world, so manicured and perfectly filtered, started crumbling at the edges. Not because I attacked them, but because I told the truth with receipts. Sabrina called the next day. I didn't answer. She texted, "Please call me. We need to talk." I didn't reply. She sent a second message. "People are harassing my mom. My dad got hate mail. What did you do?" What did I do? I remembered. That night, she showed up at the house. She didn't knock. Her key still worked. I found her standing in the kitchen in yoga pants and a loose sweatshirt, phone clutched in her hand like it might protect her. "Why would you do this?" she asked, voice shaking. "Why would you try to destroy my family?" I stared at her for a long time before answering. "I didn't destroy your family. I showed them to themselves. I told the truth. You made us look like monsters. You made yourselves look like monsters," I said. "I just stopped covering for you." She started to cry. Actual tears this time, not the staged ones from her dinner party performance. But even now, even through the shaking shoulders, her focus was on damage control. "You don't understand what you've started. People are treating me like I left Isla on purpose. Like I didn't care. You didn't care enough to show up," I said. "That's what people are responding to." She sat down at the table, covering her face. I didn't know how to deal with it. I panicked. I stayed silent for a moment, then said, "You didn't panic. You chose. And now, people see that choice." For once, she didn't argue. A few days later, I got a message from an old friend, someone who lost a child to SIDS 2 years ago. She wrote, "Thank you for your video. No one came to our son's service either. But I didn't have your courage. You gave me permission to grieve out loud." That message meant more than all the apologies I never got. It reminded me why I'd done it. Not for revenge. For Isla. So she wouldn't be erased. So no other parent would think their silence was the price of survival. Carla sent me a legal notice, asking that I remove the video due to defamation of character. My lawyer responded with one line. "Truth is not defamation." The video stayed up. Sabrina stopped calling after that. She still hadn't filed for divorce, but I knew it was coming. Or maybe she was waiting for me to do it, to save face one final time. But I wasn't rushing. The world already knew what it needed to know. The silence they gave Isla had echoed long enough. Now, it was their turn to sit in it, to hear the sound of what they left behind. And me? I kept speaking. Not always loudly, but clearly. I posted a photo every Sunday, a candle, a rose, a note addressed to Isla. Small reminders. Gentle truths. People messaged me privately to say thank you. Others unfollowed. It didn't matter. Grief had made me invisible. But truth? Truth made me seen again. I filed the paperwork at 9:12 a.m. on a Thursday. The courthouse was quiet, just a couple arguing softly near the security checkpoint and an elderly man reading a folded newspaper by the elevator. I stood in line with a manila envelope clutched in my hand. Every form already filled out, signed, dated, and notarized. I hadn't told Sabrina. I didn't need to. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about extraction, about freeing myself from the weight of pretending we'd ever been a team. I watched the clerk stamp the top page with dull finality and say, "You'll receive confirmation in the mail." Just like that. A marriage dissolved with a thud of ink and a low-toned sentence. But for me, it was less of an ending and more of a beginning. I drove home through streets that felt different, even though they hadn't changed. Maybe it was me. Maybe grief and clarity rearranged the way your eyes processed the familiar. The house was quiet when I walked in. Sabrina was at work, or pretending to be, or curled up at Carla's place crafting her next version of the truth. It didn't matter. Half the house was already empty. My half. I'd moved most of my things into a rental apartment across town 2 nights earlier. Furniture, books, Isla's crib, her onesies, the sound machine she loved. I brought it all. I didn't take it out of revenge. I took it because she wouldn't have. Sabrina had walked past Isla's room every day and never once stepped inside. She couldn't even say her name without shrinking. So I gathered every scrap of Isla's life and moved it into a space where her memory could be held, not hidden. The house had belonged to me technically, bought with inheritance money left from my mother, but I didn't want it anymore. Too many ghosts in the drywall. Too much silence tucked into corners. So I left it to Sabrina, with one condition. She would sign over any claim to the accounts I'd separated and never speak on my behalf again. The lawyer made sure of it. She tried to protest until she realized that the public's sympathy was not with her. Not anymore. After I filed, the legal notices went out. Sabrina called once, left a voicemail through tears, asking, "Are we really doing this?" I listened to it just once before deleting it. I didn't need to hear her confusion. We crossed too many fault lines already. There was no bridge back. I also filed a civil suit. Emotional abandonment, compounded by public neglect during a period of shared loss. My lawyer, Charles, had suggested it cautiously, worried it might seem vindictive. But it wasn't. It was accountability. When Sabrina and her family skipped Isla's funeral, they didn't just break hearts. They broke covenant. Legal, emotional, spiritual. The documents spelled it out in simple language, but the story was complex. It included screenshots, social media timelines, statements from relatives who had reached out, stunned, after seeing my video. "I'm not trying to punish her," I told Charles. "I'm trying to name what she did. Because if no one names it, it stays normal." He nodded, scribbling notes. "It may not stick. Judges don't always rule in favor of emotional claims." "That's okay," I said. "I'm not filing it to win. I'm filing it so the record shows someone noticed." When the lawsuit went public, Sabrina reacted predictably. She cried on camera, posted a video on her socials in a beige sweater with her hair pulled back, the kind of aesthetic vulnerability influencers curate. "I'm still grieving," she said. "And now I'm being attacked during the hardest time of my life. I loved my daughter. I just didn't know how to show it." But the comments weren't what she expected. People had seen the photos, the timeline, the silence. You can't cry your way out of the truth when the truth has evidence. "You didn't bury your child," one woman wrote. "You buried the evidence of your guilt." Another, "Grief isn't an Instagram filter." Her defenders tried, but their voices were drowned in the tide. The internet doesn't forget when the story has a baby's face and a father's voice attached to it. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything new. I let the silence speak for me. The day she officially signed the divorce decree, Sabrina sent me one final message. Just a text. No emojis. No pleading. Just 3 words. "You were right." I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the thread. I didn't need an apology I didn't believe. I didn't need redemption from someone who didn't understand what she lost. I had already reclaimed what mattered, my voice, my dignity, and Isla's legacy. I spent the following week turning my new apartment into a home. It was modest, 1 bedroom, open floor plan, pale blue walls, but it felt sacred. On one side, I built a corner for Isla, her blanket, her toys, the little knit cap from the hospital. I hung a photo of her above a shelf lined with books I used to read to her, even when she was too young to understand. I placed a rocking chair there. I sat in it every night, not in grief, but in memory. A way to say, "I remember you. I always will." People continued reaching out. Parents who had lost children. Strangers who had followed our story. A pastor who asked me to speak at a support group. I wasn't sure at first. Grief wasn't something I wanted to perform, but I said yes. And when I stood in front of that circle, telling Isla's story, I felt something shift. The tremble in my voice didn't come from pain anymore. It came from purpose. "This isn't about blame," I told them. "It's about choosing to carry someone's memory when no one else will. It's about saying their name out loud, even when it makes the room uncomfortable. It's about truth and what happens when you stop letting people pretend your pain is too much for them to deal with." They nodded. Some cried. One woman came up afterward and hugged me for a long time without speaking. That night, I went home and sat in Isla's corner, rocking slowly, listening to the city hum outside my window. I wasn't whole. I never would be. But I was mine again. And in a world that had tried to minimize the weight of what I lost, that was a quiet, defiant victory. They thought I would fall apart, that I would disappear, that grief would hollow me out and leave me weak. But they were wrong. Grief didn't destroy me. It refined me. It burned off the fake, the fragile, the unnecessary. And what was left, what remained, was someone I recognized. Someone I could live with. Someone Isla could be proud of. A year after Isla's funeral, I stood barefoot in the garden I had planted for her. The grass was soft and damp under my toes, and the breeze that moved through the trees wasn't mournful, it was gentle, even kind. In the center of it all, framed by forget-me-nots, violets, and climbing roses, sat the bench I commissioned in her name. It wasn't grand. It didn't shout. It simply bore 3 words carved into the wood. Forever loved, Isla. That garden wasn't just for her. It was for me. For all the versions of myself I lost and shed since that morning she didn't wake. And for the man I became in the silence that followed. When I first moved into this house, people thought I was running. But I wasn't. I was building something she could have grown up in, if the world had been fairer. Every flower I planted held a memory. The rose bushes along the fence, those were for the way she giggled when I made silly faces. The lavender by the gate, her blanket had smelled faintly of it after every wash. Even the stones that lined the garden path had meaning. I'd written dates on the underside of each before setting them in place. Her first laugh. Her first smile. The night she gripped my finger and wouldn't let go. Today, a memorial service was being held here. Private, quiet, but no less real. It was for parents like me. Those who had lost children too early, who had been told in subtle and cruel ways that their grief was too much, their loss too small to matter. The world made us feel like we were only allowed a brief, polite sadness before moving on. I never moved on. I moved forward, yes, but I carried her. Always. I spoke last, not because I wanted to close the ceremony with grandeur, but because I wanted to listen. I needed to hear others speak her language, grief, love, remembrance. A woman named Callie spoke about her son, born at 26 weeks, who lived only 8 days. A man named Jonathan read a letter to his daughter, written on the day she would have turned 5. And then there was Helena, sharp-eyed, soft-voiced, who said the world had never acknowledged her miscarriage. It's like she never existed, she whispered. But she did. Even if no one else knew her, I did. When it was my turn, I didn't read from a paper. I just looked around the garden and let it speak first. The wind rustled through the trees. A butterfly landed on the edge of a bloom. And for a moment, I let silence do what it had once broken me with, stand strong. My daughter's name was Isla, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. She had a laugh that sounded like a hiccup, and eyes that always found mine first, even in a crowded room. She died of SIDS when she was 5 months old. I buried her alone, not because no one knew, but because the people who should have stood beside me chose not to. I paused. Heads nodded gently. Some hands found tissues. Others just clasped tighter around knees or arms. In the months that followed, I continued. I was told to move on, to stop making others uncomfortable, that it was just a baby. But grief doesn't care how old someone was. It cares about how deeply you love them. And I loved Isla with everything I had. A woman near the back whispered, "Amen." Soft. True. I didn't speak out for months. But when I did, I learned something powerful. That silence protects the wrong people. It shields the selfish, the cruel, the careless. So I told the truth. And the world responded. Not with sympathy, but with recognition. Because this grief? It's everywhere. And so often, we're carrying it alone. I looked down at the rose in my hand, freshly clipped from the bush near the bench, and stepped forward. I knelt at Isla's stone and placed it gently there. She changed me, I said, not just in how I love, but in how I stand. I used to think strength meant not crying. Now I know it means refusing to let someone be forgotten. After the service, people lingered. They walked the garden paths, touched the flowers, read the little plaques under each tree, every one dedicated to a child, named or unnamed. One woman approached me quietly. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her expression held something else too. Resolve. "Thank you," she said. "My family made me feel like my baby didn't count. But your story, it gave me permission to grieve. I smiled, not out of pride, but understanding. She counted. They all do. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, I sat on the bench alone. The air smelled of lavender and cut grass. I closed my eyes and listened. Not for Isla's voice, because I knew I'd never hear it again, but for the feeling she left behind. That warm flicker in the chest. That sacred ache. That beautiful, unbearable love. I thought of Sabrina, Carla, Donald, Ryan. I thought of the party they chose over presents, of the pool photos and the lies. I thought of the envelope on the dinner table, the silence it left behind. And I let all of it pass through me without bitterness, because I had built something they couldn't touch. They missed the burial. They missed the truth. And now the world had seen what they did. That was never just a baby. That was Isla, my daughter, my fire wrapped in tenderness. And in this garden, surrounded by life and memory, she bloomed again and again. Not forgotten. Forever loved.